Hi everyone, today we're joined by Jerome Harvey-Agyei to talk about listening. So this is a follow-up conversation to our second Reimagining Government webinar of 2021, Learning to Listen Again, and it's brought to you by the Centre for Public Impact and the Australian New Zealand School of Government. Jerome, thanks so much for joining us.
It's all right. I apologise, I couldn't make the webinar. Time zones got me confused.
No, not at all. It's a real honour and a privilege to be chatting with you today. And a lot of people have sent in questions and are really excited to hear what you say. So thanks again for joining us.
No problem. Happy to be here. Happy to add value.
So you're doing a fair bit. So you're a senior children and youth participation officer at the Greater London Authority, a radio host and a co-founder of the Tote Project. So a busy man. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey and some of the work you're doing now and what you're interested in?
So my journey, a lot of what I've done has come through experiences of trauma. So growing up in care system, being abused and, experiencing abuse with my parents and then in the system as well. And then understanding the conditions of the system and how it kind of plays into our kind of trauma. So a lot of what I've done has been shaped by that. So it's like I've always been interested in how do we help people heal, number one, but also how do we relate to each other in a better way, which is more healthy. Because when growing up, up to the age of 9, I never had a model of love that I could really identify with. I had models of trauma, but I never had models of love. And then when I got to the age of 9, I began to understand what love was that wasn't dysfunctional. So that brought me to, because I was really into football. So soccer was soccer, some people say football. In the UK, we call it football. Outside of the UK, they call it soccer. But so I was really into football at the time. And I had a kind of map, like a two-way road. Go to do football or go and help people. And I think deep down, I was like, I want to help people because I knew within myself that I was like, I wish I could have had that help. So I ended up getting into some stuff around children's rights. So children's rights many years ago now, was a big thing in the UK. So it was all about, rights are at the forefront of children and young people. How do we make that look like? What does that look like in practice? So there was of the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, there's Article 12, which we paramountly worked on, which was every child should have the right to be involved in decisions that affect them. And so a lot of the children's rights services we had were based around that. How do you help young people be involved in the decisions that affect them? So just to give you an example, we would be involved in, interview panels. So for all staff that worked with young people in care, we would be interviewing them. So we would choose who's working for these services. And that was quite powerful. Things like understanding, helping young people understand what their rights are. So a lot of what I've got into has never been, there wasn't a conscious intention, it was a subconscious intention. So a lot of it has been like driven by the trauma that I experienced, trying to find, because we all have this primary question that we're trying to ask ourselves. So for me, it was like, how do I save the world? That was kind of my primary question. That's changed a lot about, it was more about now it's more about how do I be my authentic self? How do I show up more for myself? So then I can obviously show up for other people. So and throughout my journey, I had a lot of experiences of trauma. So I've been stabbed myself 7 times. I've got friends that I lost to violence, loads of friends that have been killed over the years. So again, that starts to kind of make you become very sensitive to life and to experiences and to people. And again, I wanted to source, how do we help people to relate better to each other? And I was in the belly of the beast, because I'm in this environment where I'm going in my work world, I'm going into, these environments where I'm meeting all these different amazing people doing amazing work. But then in my home life, I'm seeing all this trauma. And in my environment, I'm seeing all this trauma. I'm like, whoa. But rather than it being something that I suffered from, what I did is I understood that maybe I'm the bridge. Maybe I'm the bridge between these worlds. I can communicate quite comfortably in this place of trauma and fear, and because it's where I'm from, but also I can communicate in a loving way in this place of like environment or work and things like that. So I've always kind of seen myself as that bridge between different worlds. You know, I can help different worlds understand each other. So I can bring those in that traumatic environment into these other worlds where they can feel free and loved and all that. And I can bring the ones that don't understand into that traumatic world because I understand the experiences through personal experience. So yeah, I've done a lot in the whole world of children's rights and advocacy. So advocating for children and young people, and that gave me the breadth of my experience in terms of, this was with Bernardo's in the UK, and working with children from immigration, disabilities, those with different sexual orientations, those from crazy traumatic backgrounds, those that are coming from countries, you know, that are war-torn, like you name it, I've worked with it in terms of experiences. And so that gave me the understanding. And I think that's the key when we're talking about listening. Understanding is so important. And there has to be, to understand, you have to have the intention of understanding. Some people do it as like a kind of framework that they, but you have to have a deeper intention about understanding. I truly want to understand. And the more you do that, the more you can make, you know, you can create great listening. And then I went into, so I completely made a little shift, and I went into a thing called National Citizen Service, where I was a behaviour mentor. So I hated the job title, but the work was amazing. So being a behaviour mentor was like saying that there's something wrong with their behaviour. But actually I was there to communicate. And they would send me into like kids of like 50 trying to fight. And I'd go in, I'd be like, hey man, it's all peace and love. That was an amazing job because I got to connect and really recharge people back into life. So that like sometimes I'd go in and teachers were looking drained and they're like, can you bring Jerome in because I'm unable to manage these young people. I'd go in, give life to the teacher, do all these exercises, and all of a sudden the whole group's just like connected. I love that job. And then I do, throughout the years, I've done a lot of training. So the training that we run is What Would Love Do? And that's all about how you incorporate love within a system. And then the Topi project, which is set up in memory of my friend who committed suicide. And that was about creating a space for care leavers to feel loved. And through that, we've done so many different things in terms of like supporting the whole situation around care leavers, children who was in the foster care system, and they've left it now. And a lot of the time they suffer with loneliness. They're overrepresented in jails. They're overrepresented in suicides, and mental health illnesses. You name it. Children in care in the foster care system tend to go through all of these different issues. So my kind of primary aim was to help the most vulnerable so that we can empower the world around us. And so what we did that is through kind of creating space for authentic conversation, no agenda, just a bit of food. We all love food. I love food anyway, but sitting around a table, having food, having real conversations. No one's paid to be there. We just create this space of magic. And then out of it, whatever comes out of it, comes out of it. And we've been doing that for the last 10 years now, which has been, it's been one of the best things that we do. And that led me into City Hall. So City Hall was, for the mayor's office, was kind of, it wasn't intentional. Someone called me and said, hey, there's a job that's come up as a temporary job. Hope you can cover it. I went for the job like this. I just went with my cap on. I was just like, let me just go. I'm going to test an idea. Let me see if what I can say can change the way that I look, like, you know, because obviously they talk about diversity. It's a public realm. I look like this. I'm going into City Hall, which is in your mind very corporate. And then I went in and I just did the interview and they gave me the job. So I was like, okay, so maybe they did hear me. Maybe there's power in the words. And then from that, I got recruited within the team into the violence reduction unit, which is about helping to reduce violence across London. Because we've got a really big issue with violence with knives. And it's often blamed on young people, but it's not a young people issue. I think it's a society issue because we see it on media. It's just one of those things that has played out. But but we, like, in the grand scheme of it, we, like, the city's a beautiful city, but it's just there's a lot of attention on violence when it's not as major as the beautiful things that are happening. So it's just that having that balance. But I'm here to kind of help reduce that, and help to bring in the real life experiences of the streets into that arena and connect communities. So yeah, that's kind of been my journey. It's a little bit long-winded, but I'm hoping that it's some sort of value.
Not at all, man. I'm so glad you decided not to be a footballer and got into this. I mean, it's really powerful. And I think just throughout your life, you know, building on trauma and transforming it into love and empowering people is really powerful work. And so I guess I had two questions. One is like, with the kids you work with, and you know, even with yourself, maybe, like, how did it feel to not be listened to government? And I guess the second follow-up question to that was, in the work you're doing, or you know, in the experiences you've had, how did it then feel to be listened to government? So what did that look like?
So the first question was, how did it feel to not be listened by government? Or so, to be fair, we never, growing up and during my early years of work, we didn't expect government to listen. It was just one of those things that, you know, they don't understand, so how can they listen? That's what the thing is for us. Is like, if you don't understand an experience, how can you listen? Because you're not tuned into what people are really truly experiencing. So that was the thing, and it just felt disempowering at the time. It was just like, if I give an example, our local government, which was our local councils, they generally, there was points, and we're at a point where a lot of the local governments and the government doesn't really listen. And so now I'd say it's frustrating, because there is a cry out of experiences that are going on at the moment, and people, their response sometimes is like, did you just see that? They just, like, for instance, I'll give you an example. We brought together loads of community members about solutions to the violence that are affecting young people with knives. So they decide to go and get a PR company with chicken boxes to have like messages on the chicken boxes to say, do not pick up a knife. So when these kids open their chicken boxes, they see, and you're like, where did that idea come from? Like, that wasn't spoken to, and the community made an uproar. They got all the chicken boxes and delivered it to the government offices and said, stick your chicken boxes, you know, where the sun don't shine. So it's like, that's the problem, is that they make these assumptions. They don't do it with, they do it for. And that's the key. When it comes to listening is not about doing for, or, you know, having this savior complex. It's about doing with. That is listening, because sometimes you may not be able to understand because you just don't, you're from a different world. So do it with, go through a journey together, and it's that journey that's important. So for us, there was many times where you're frustrated, and the reason why it's frustrating is because the solution is so simple, but yet the people complicate it, and they make all the solutions so complicated. They want a meeting after meeting after meeting, and all it takes is a little step of action to make a change. And that's the problem. And that's what used to be so frustrating, because you're like, if you listened, you would have heard, you would have taken action, you would have seen a simple solution, and you would have also got credit for it. So there's power in actually taking action on listening. So for us, it was just being in care. You're already let down by the system. The outcomes and aspirations for you are not high. So by the time you leave the system, it's like, okay, well, go to the job center, or, you know, don't aim high. You can't have your own business. In my working world, it is frustrating, especially at the moment, in terms of trying to, violence is a massive issue anywhere in the world, and trying to get people in positions where they don't really understand, that they've never had an experience of violence. So when you ask them, have you had an experience? No, I don't. I've never gone into anything. So how are you going to make it? You're paid to be an expert, but you don't understand what violence, how the impact of it. So that for me, I really struggle with, because there's lots of people paid. There's a whole set of arenas paid, but they don't know how to address it. When I can give you some simple steps, save you lots of money as well, So that for me is frustrating. It's just frustration. I think it's frustration because the real life experiences don't marry up with the people who have the strategic view to make something happen. And then action takers. You need those three elements. You need the real life experiences, you need the strategic view, and then you need the action takers. And those generally are three different types of people, but you bring them together, it's a wrap. Yeah. In terms of the positive side, when you are listened to, there's such power in it. So I was from a time, I think it was 2005, if I believe correctly, where the children's rights era, we had lots of children's rights services. We had lots of services called participation services where young people were involved in the design, development, and delivery of projects. This was across London. Like, I don't know anywhere outside of London, but there was a culture of like, involve young people in the design, the development, and the delivery. This is participation. Engagement is talking to young people. What's your view? How do you feel about it? And then responding. Participation is, what do you actually want to focus on? Okay, let's develop it together. Okay, now you're going to deliver it and you're going to be paid to deliver it. That's the difference. So that is what we call genuine listening, because you want to understand someone through the whole process. You want to take them through the whole journey. And that was what was really powerful for me, seeing that, being a part of that as a young person, and having 30 other young people who to this day I still speak to, because we were so empowered. And we are actually the ones who are now helping the UK government to look at reviewing their whole social care system, communicating effectively, where they actually understand, oh my God, this makes sense, bringing in those experiences. So when you do that, you enable experiences to be empowered, but also you enable global change, because you're able to filter between. So I was able to pick up all these unconscious skills, like, oh, that's the language of the system. Okay, I've got a language of the streets, language of the system. Now I know how to communicate in a certain way. Then you can build that bridge. So then that's given me the power in where I am now, because I can speak the language of the streets and bring it back to the system, hear the language of the system, bring it back to the streets, and help them to both understand what each other's saying. So yeah, for me, and you get stuff done when like we did a thing called Step to Step, basically, and it was a load of young people would assess how well services were involving their young people in the design, development, and delivery. So they looked at different part of the services, but all the different teams, what they would do is compete. So they would compete to better involve their young people in their work. Oh, we can get them designing a leaflet. Oh, we can get them painting our building. And so there was like this competition of how to involve young people in their work. And what you found is young people, the workers felt happier. So all the social workers were like, we're actually having real relationships with our young people. Like, we're painting a building together, or we're designing a leaflet together. It's not all just like tick box exercises. And then you found that there was a lot more rich conversations from that, and then a lot more ideas and solutions. And when people saw that, oh, it can happen, there's not this divide between professionals and young people, we can work together, we are all professional. That's what made it really beautiful. And then the young people would then go, okay, you're a 3-star participation service, you're a 4-star. So all the services would be like, oh, we want to get to a 4-star or a 5-star. And so it just kind of, I'm not saying it's probably the best model, but it's an idea in terms of if people wanted to create that morale of how do we compete around looking after ourselves, or how do we compete around ideas to, bring in that breadth of real, authentic, meaningful solutions. So yeah, hope that was a useful example.
No, 100%. It's like, yeah, so often you see measurement in terms of just numbers and ticking boxes and used to control things and how much money you're spending, and not really getting the richness of the stories and lived experience that comes with listening. And yeah, like just hearing your examples, it really feels transformative, like good listening and good community engagement. And I guess, yeah, you mentioned we know the answers, like people know the answers, and that it's working with people, rather than for them, or, telling them what you think and doing an engagement process just to tick boxes. But Why do you reckon it's so hard for government to listen? Like, what are the barriers there? And what's really preventing governments from listening in a meaningful way?
The government, what's preventing them from listening is a lack of authenticity. The reason why I say that is because there's people in the government that want to serve the people. There's systems that don't serve the people. They're reliant on people being dumbed down, basically, not knowing how to, navigate this world. So what they're doing is there's like a smoke screen. It's like, hey, this is what we are showing you, what we're intention, but behind that, there's an ulterior motive. A lot of the time it's about money. So when we start thinking about money sometimes steers people into arenas where it's like that wasn't what the people actually wanted. So just to give an example, the amount that these governments invest in their military, now people don't have a say on that, which to me is a bit crazy, because we should be able to say, actually, we don't want you to invest in military, we want you to invest in people. They would say, but due to national security. But how can we as people know what is national security or not? We're not informed about that. So because of that, they're able to spend all this money, which sometimes it disappears. So for me, the reason, and going back to what I said before, is about that understanding of experiences. So a lot of the people in the governments are from a certain elitist kind of arena. There is, and I think that's changing. I'm hoping that's changing as well. But I'm seeing it slightly changing on local levels, but on a national level, there's still this kind of elitist kind of arena where people that go to certain schools get into government or are able to influence government in some way. So the door isn't open to the communities who've got that rich experience. So there's that gap of understanding. So it's people like myself and you who can actually bring that experience into these arenas. But I think, and let's be frank, there's some people that don't want to understand because they're comfortable. I don't care. I'm comfortable. I'm in my position. I don't need to worry about what everyone else is doing. I'm good. So they'll protect their position in certain ways, which sometimes contradicts the people that they're trying to serve. I think what the other thing is that there's a lot of people pointing fingers at the government. And so that can feel very heavy. So if you're emotionally being like no matter what you do, you're always wrong, you're just like, I give up. So actually there might be a level of resilience that a lot of these people in these positions need, or a level of empowerment to go, because I always say to people, no matter what happens in life, anything can happen to you. There's always two meanings that are available. There's the suffering or there's the empowerment, and it's down to you, whatever you choose. And this is any situation. You can lose someone, you can choose the suffering, or you can choose the empowerment. So the suffering would be, I've lost them, I'm never going to see them again, I'm going to be depressed for life. Or the empowerment is, they had life, I'm going to learn the skills they get me to move in. And so the reason why I say that is because when we go to governments, what happens is a lot of they're paid lots of money, and they're meant to be in positions where they can have an overview of things. That also needs to be reflected within themselves. They need to be able to make a non-judgmental view, take in different views and be like, you know what, okay, how are we going to help to bring equilibrium across so people are happy across the board. But you find that governments they're like gangs themselves. There's always this, look at you. And all we would say to people, when you've got a finger pointing out, you've always got three pointing back at yourself. So there's a lack of responsibility. I think if there was someone to take responsibility and say, you know what, historically, governments, we have got it wrong. That responsibility, we have got it wrong. We've played this kind of gang game where it's like you against me, all this stuff. What if we try to build a bridge where no matter what, we all agreed about something, which we all are human. So what can we humanly, moralistically, or values-wise all agree on? Like kids shouldn't be hurt, all these things, and then go down to specific details about, okay, how do we create a more balanced society? But my belief is that I don't believe they always want that, because if you can divide people, then you can still control them. when people are unified, there's less control. That's how I see it, but it might not be true. But the way I'm seeing the world play out at the moment, I'm like, there's so much negativity going on. So of course there's going to be disempowerment. So, you know, you've had the stuff around color, which has been, you know, back and forth. You've got the stuff around religious needs. When you look at Israel and Palestine at the moment, how that's affecting the world, you know, that you've got stuff around class, which is all around poverty and things like that. And then you've got stuff around, you know, different rights around sexuality. So there's so many different categories that are just like, that there is no focus. And so if there is no focus, so like if the governments were able to just be like, we're going to focus on this thing for this limited amount of time to, you know, help add value to our society, then we might see some change. But because there's so much going on, there's not a lot, like it's hard to focus on one thing and to be seen in a light which is like useful. So, but for me, I don't like, in my mind, I don't actually focus on government per se. I look at community. So I'm like, how do we, because you can't expect them. If they don't understand, they don't understand. And that's okay, because they're not from our world. What we do is, though, we have the power of influence as people. So what we can do is we can mobilize our communities to create models of change and bring them to the government and say, look, this has worked in our community. We've also seen, we've tried it over here as well, and it seems to work there. Would you be willing to take this on as an idea, looking at a national? So I think there's a bit of responsibility from the community to look at creating models that, because they don't understand. And we're seeing that across the world, the amount of countries that are protesting, that's a clear indication that they don't understand. So what can we do to help them to understand? Give them models that they can work with, because then we can say, we've given you model. What do we need to do? We've given you models. Now time to look at that, you know. And we had it in the UK where loads of the MPs, they didn't believe we had an issue with poverty because we're England, you know, one of the richest countries in the world. So they're thinking, no, we don't have an issue with that. It's lazy parents. Okay, fair enough. So we had a footballer who said, I'm going to create an initiative around food poverty and we're going to help feed families. He went and fed millions of families. All of a sudden, the government's interested now. We were going to support this initiative. And so he took his initiative and then presented it to the government and said, you are responsible for this. So I think you should take it on board. And they did. And so that shows you the power of influence. If we can use the community to mobilize something, because what happened when the government said they're not supporting the child food poverty, loads of companies said, well, we will. And then there was like, maybe we should backtrack on what we said. So that is the power of, like, you know, having people. The people are the power. And so it's just kind of reminding ourselves, oh yeah, we can do something, and we can remind, because they're governed by our consent. So it's just us being able to say, look, this is something that's important to a lot of people. Can you take this on board?
That's powerful. And I guess one thing that came up in the webinar was how difficult it was for leaders to relinquish their power. Like once they got power, it was hard to give it back to community and devolve power. And also it was hard to sort of say, I don't know, to say, this is a complex situation and we don't know what to do, because that in itself was sort of relinquishing power. But what might you tell a leader, or what advice might you give a leader that's struggling and really wants to listen to community, but, you know, might not know how, or might feel uncomfortable with it?
I think the best leaders are absolutely vulnerable, because if you are vulnerable, no one can't like bring you down. So if you're absolutely vulnerable in terms of, I do not know, there's a lot, as a leader, you cannot know everything. It's not possible with the richness of experiences that are in our global community now. So start there. Start with, I don't know everything, or start with a vulnerability, because the vulnerability is your power, you know. when people think that it's they're relinquishing, actually you're giving yourself even more power, because you're giving people your true heart. I think it's got to the space now where we're starting to realize that politics is about humanity, and it's about heart space as well. So a lot of it used to be a very strategic and all this stuff, but now they're realizing, well, people actually care. They actually care about things. So when for me, my advice to someone in that position would be your true self. Because they've had to put on these masks, and it's weird because they're putting on these masks that don't even resonate with the people. When you take off that mask, you say, I'm done with this crap, and then you just give this little passionate speech, people are like, yeah, I'm feeling that. I've seen it so many times when you see leaders take off your mask and just be your authentic self, and just, what do you really feel about this situation? And for me, once it doesn't harm or hurt anyone or cause anyone any loss, that's the main thing. Is like, you have to understand your responsibility as a leader is to be a model of what you want to see in the world. So, hold yourself in high esteem as well. But for me, the power in seeing someone vulnerable and being able to be like, you know what, I don't know, but I'm going to give space for other people. They don't realize, but you're giving yourself more power, because people see the power of vulnerability. They see the power of, they just took action and just gave someone else space. I'm going to support them even more now. So it's just changing that meaning that they're giving to it. Oh, if I give myself power, it's that greed. It's that greedy way of thinking. And we have to get away from that. You're not in your position because of you. You're in position because of people. So whether you like it or not, the people, as quick as they voted for you, they can get rid of you, if you want it. So, you don't really have the power. The people have the power. They've given you the power. They can also take it away. And so it's reminding them of that. Like, who are you, what's trying to serve? Are you serving yourself, or are you serving the people? Because that's what these positions are about. It's about bringing balance to the world around you and doing the best you can to serve people. So we as people should not be submitting to the government's will. We should be challenging on them being able to bring balanced environments for our community, healthy environments for our community. That's what it's all about to me. How will, for our kids growing up, is it a better world than it used to be? Can we honestly say that? And on some degree there is, and on some degree there isn't. So we need to look at what isn't and challenge those things, and what is, we need to give life to more of that and share that around the world. So yeah, I think for me, the advice that I'd give to someone who's in leadership would be just, try and remove your mask if you can. Try and be your authentic self. Talk about what you care about. Talk about what you want, not what you don't want. Because we need more of that positive kind of energy in this arena at the moment, because try and connect to people's hearts. If you don't know, go and listen. Go into the communities. People just want to see you. So do a tour. Do a little tour. The same time you spend in these official buildings, go and spend in the communities. Listen to people, hear their stories. No cameras. Get rid of the cameras and just go with a team of officials or cabinet members. Go in and listen to communities. Go to different communities that are suffering. Hear the stories. Then it will become real, because you get to, when you physically are in the space of someone and you speak to young mums who are suffering, you're like, anyone who's got a heart's going to be like, oof, that's hard to hear. Then it's going to make it real for you. Then you start to understand, and then you can build a bridge. Yeah, so I don't know if that answered the question, but I'm hoping.
No, it did. It definitely did. And I think, like, if we look at public servants and people, working on the front line and really engaging with community, or trying to engage with community and listen, what are some of the skills that they need to effectively listen? And, do you have any other examples about, projects that have worked well, or listening that worked well, and why did it work well?
So we did a thing years ago. So we kind of lobbied for back in the day, children in care. What would happen is, to have a sleepover, your friend would need to get police checked, and it would sometimes take up to 6 months. And so it was very intrusive. So us as a group kind of was like, this needs to change, man. It just needs to be like a social worker who can just you know, or a carer who can just make a decision. And then, so we lobbied for a while, and then we had a minister who was quite, you know, into children in care, came and listened to lots of young people's views, experiences, went back to government and lobbied. And because it wasn't even on the agenda, it wasn't thought of, but they managed to get a change like that. And you're like, example of listening. Came, listened, felt the emotion, went back, boom, change done. But I think the skills that are needed is bravery, especially in this, like, you need to be brave enough to, because there is this kind of like conforming to like ideals of how things should structurally look and all this stuff. It's like, that's a load of crap. If you want to make change, go and hear your communities, and then, okay. So I would say one is, yeah, you need to be brave enough to go into communities, especially in this day where some communities might not be in favor of you. So that takes bravery to listen with an open heart, although the people in front of you might not necessarily like you. But you can win people over when you're genuine. That's the power of, because a lot of community members misunderstand governments. None of them care, none of them give a crap. Then you go into the arena and you're like, actually, the people do care. It's the system. It's the robotic side of it, which is like, we need to move away from that, because that's what's causing people to feel stressed out. Two, there is a space for a level of self-work that they need to do. In order to listen, you need to do a bit of self-work, which is self-awareness, you know, self-love. If you are traumatized or not well within yourself, you're not going to be able to hear anyone outside. So as they say, as within, as without. So if you don't do the work within, you can't hear without. So outside of yourself, the self-work is like probably the crucial side of it. The more self you do, like for me with myself, if I'm in a dark place, I can't hear you because I'm only hearing my own thoughts. So that's important. Every leader should have a level of self-work, because also you can be a model. So a kid can look at you and go, Obama, look at the way he carries himself. You know, he's relaxed, he looks happy, he carries himself with a sense of pride and all these things. I like that. That's a model. So that also helps. You can tell when someone's done self-work and when someone hasn't. Boris Johnson for us has not done self-work, because you can see he's just manifesting a lot of mess. You can see it in the way he's auras. He doesn't know. So that would be a crucial thing for me. Create space. If you want to listen, you have to create space. And so that would be, and that doesn't have to be you personally, but, you know, set environments or give instructions of how to create space. So cabinet members, go and speak to your, I mean, we recently, a group of our young people recently spoke to cabinet members about young people getting back into employment after lockdown. So they came and they listened. They was like, okay, what would it mean to genuinely support young people to, well, and the young people were like, well, first of all, we got to have the skills. You're telling us about employment, but have we got the skills to get employment? Oh, we didn't even think about that. You see? And it's so simple, but it's that little bit that they missed, which is why young people weren't getting into. Have you realized the centers that you've got for jobs, like, you know, they're not empowering. They're actually disempowering. What? They're the job center. They're not empowering. The people that are in these places are very, they talk down to people. So it's understanding those experiences. So yeah, so resilience, self-work, creating space, and having fun. I think a lot of the time in these arenas, like, everyone's so serious, man. And I'm like, it makes more sense to have fun, like create fun environments. Like, most of my greatest listening exercises has happened through some sort of fun experiences. So, you know, you're cooking food together, you're all laughing and joking, and next thing you know, these gems come out of, you know, you're sitting around a table, you're eating food, and they're talking to you, or you're playing games with a young person, or communities, you're playing different games and they start talking. You start doing little fun exercises, they start talking. So creating experiences where people can actually interact in a different way with you would be really cool. So not just having a typical boring seminar where everyone's like sitting around a round table. So what does it look like to listen? And create something fun, like do some games, get people interacting, get their barriers down, because people go into these things with their barriers up, with their masks on. Get them down, let them be their authentic selves. Let people just say, you know what, this is, at times I feel like this is some bullshit, you know, like, yes, I felt the same too, man. You know, like, how do we create that space where people can go, I'm done? So there's a thing that I found out about that. I met a guy and he was doing it as well, but it was called F Up Fridays. So basically team members would just come and their week would be, they would come and talk about their mess ups for the week. And they would just have, people would just laugh, like, because you just start thinking, right, I overthought that. I thought it was a mess up. And then you hear someone else who's like, mine wasn't a mess up, yours is a mess up, kind of thing. So it's just like creating that space for people to be like, you know what, we get it wrong, you know, and, you know, really badly sometimes. But the important thing is, what do we learn from when we get it wrong? And I think that's what's key, is that, you know, people in these positions can be able to reflect on something that's happened in their life or in their job and be like, I messed up big time, and I'm the first to admit it. But this is the learning that I've taken from it, and I'm hoping that as a community we can talk about these things when we mess up and non-judgmentally. So it's like, okay, that was a big mess up, yeah, but what do we do? What do we do going forwards?
Yeah, that's great. I think especially the point about having fun. Like, I feel like that process of connecting to people really builds trust, and it's something that's overlooked if you've already designed something and are just going into community wanting to tick off boxes and say, okay, this is what they think, or it's in line with what we thought. It's not really starting with community and sort of co-designing the process. So I think that building trust really, really resonates with me. But we had a question from our community of practice, and it was from Sydney Heimbrock, who asked, how do we close the gap between listening, understanding, and action? Like, I guess it'd erode trust if you were listening to someone and pushed for action and that didn't happen. Like, that listening would make it worse almost. So how can we close the gap between listening and action and make it so that you know, frontline workers are able to push for action?
Yeah. The main thing is you give space to those, as I said, there's understanding who needs to understand, who needs to listen, and who needs to take the action. And so being clear about who needs to do what, and then having a roadmap. So I find, so what we did a lot in the past is we had a roadmap, a visual roadmap that we all kind of, so you would have young people, community members, decision makers, leaders, all that stuff together. And they come up with the roadmap. So this is where we're at now. In 6 months, this is where we want to be. Who needs to do what at what time? And then being accountable to that as well. So not just leaders going, yeah, this is great, we have it on our radar, and then disappearing. Actually, they're accountable to another body who can say, you're not doing what you said you was going to do, so let's do this. So I think for a lot of community members now, they're tired of people listening. They're tired of being researched, and people, we know the problems now. We've known them for many years. That the amount of research that goes into it's just a cycle. People want action now. I think that is listening now to a lot of people. To hear us, you need to take action, not just say, oh yeah, we understand that, you know, Black and ethnic minorities are disproportionately affected and this and this and this. Yeah, we've known that for years now. Yeah, that stemmed all the way back hundreds of years. What are you going to do about it? That's the question. So I think having those kind of targets that are, you know, realistic as well. So a lot of people set unrealistic targets that they don't even believe in. So if you don't even believe in it, you're not really going to you're going to try. You're not going to do it or not do it. You're just going to try half-heartedly. So it's just, and having everyone on board. So you need certain types of leaders who are like, and that's where bravery comes from. It's like, you know what, let's do it. Let's have a go at something. Let's just stop moving around in this airy-fairy place. But yeah, for me, what I've seen in terms of examples of listening and taking is like, sometimes it's just small things, like simplify your solutions. Why do we complicate it? We even make up new words and stuff to explain what listening and stuff. I don't know why we as humans complicate solutions when a lot of them are very simple. So I would always say simplify, have a clear roadmap, and who needs to listen, who needs to take action, who needs to understand, and bring them together, and you come up with the plan together, and it has to have a time limit. And I think someone at CPI told me, like, I like to see a close. So there has to be a starting and an ending. We need to close it. Like, there's certain things that are ongoing. So like diversity is an ongoing thing. But in terms of like certain things the community want to see, that there has to be a close. Like, this has to be done, deadline, because we've got deadlines for everything else. Why have we not got deadlines for things that are important to communities? You know, so that needs to become more paramount. You know, if we look at some of the political arenas right now, you know, Brexit in the UK, Brexit has to get done by. So why have you not got a deadline for reducing homelessness? Why have you not got a deadline for a certain amount of housing and things like that? So it's being very intentional about how you want something to play out. So yeah, I mean, closing the gap, and the other way you close the gap is you bring more of those community experiences within these arenas. So you give space. That's the only way you can really make a proper change from a government level, is you bring in those parliament buildings, you bring community members. Today, we're talking on the topic of, you know, young women feeling isolated or women feeling in danger via men. We're going to bring in some women to voice their experiences so we can properly understand. Do you get what I'm saying? And then that experience then makes people go, oh, I didn't even think about it like that. Damn, they're not hearing it from third party, from the news, from an article. They're hearing it from real life people. I find there's power. Again, there's power in people. There is so much breadth of experience that you can bring those into those. The stories are what's really, I've found anyway, that stories move people. So, for instance, over Europe, we had a massive issue with immigration, and people were like, we don't want the immigrants coming. And then a story of a young kid washed up on the shore, died. And that story moves everyone. Actually, let them in. We don't even understand what they're going for. And that created an understanding, actually, because I'm like to people, why would someone want to leave their country to come to your country and, you know, take your jobs? Often they're adding value, and they're coming from war-torn countries. So let's think about the story here. Are we making an assumption based on a bias, or what we don't know and what we don't understand? When you hear a child's story, I had to go through the Sahara Desert, I had to go across the sea and all these things, you're like, oh, damn, that's some crazy stuff right there. What can we do to better that, to stop you from having to take that journey? Because that's a dangerous journey. What can we do to support those countries? Do you get what I'm saying? So it's just that when you bring in those experiences, those lived experiences, those stories, that can move and change a dynamic. But yeah, it's so important that the leaders that are intentional. If they're not, forget them. It's on the community now. If they don't understand, they're not going to understand, and they might not want to. It's down to us as a community to take action. Again, as I said before, if we can take action on what we know will work and create it as a model and a blueprint, then you can take it back to them and go, well, we know you didn't believe in it, but here it is. Here's a model that works. This is how we want you to take action. It's proven. Here's the stats to back it up. This is the outcomes. They can't argue with it. Because they speak, a lot of governments speak, they don't speak in emotion, which is what the community is speaking. The community speaking emotion, the government speaking logic and stats and statistics and writing. So how do you get them to understand? Is you do something, you put it in paper, and you show them the results, the outcomes of it in their language. But they also have to understand the emotion that people are feeling. They have to, and the governments have to get better at that, you know, being emotive in terms of like connecting with people. There is just a lack of connection. They're plugged out, as I call it. They're plugged out of their communities. So they need to plug back in, you know, get in the communities. I would say, if I had my way, I'd be like, you have to spend half of your days in communities so you understand what you're making decisions about. You get that real raw understanding. So then it's like, okay, it makes sense. Now, the second half of the year, we got to strategically put in roadmaps for each of the different arenas. then there's results.
That's awesome, Matt. That's a great insight. And I guess it's a lovely point to wrap up, because I think this whole conversation has been about how listening really is transformative, but how it's so relational, right? Like how it's bringing that emotion in and empowering people, and, you know, using lived experience to really bring color to stories, and not just, you know, using numbers, or just, you know, coming in, making decisions, and, you know, using or governments, you know, having that control and power, and instead giving it to people and empowering them. So this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's been great chatting with you, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of people in our community of practice happy that we got the time to talk.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me, and I'm wishing everyone an amazing year ahead as we start to reopen slowly. I'm just like, start reconnecting, building those relationships. Yeah.